3 abortions, 10 years apart. The man who broke her twice, he married someone else. She married a good man, then he came back. Prologue. Before she was 17, the first time Derek Hollis made her feel invisible. They had been dating for 3 weeks, if you could call it dating. He had asked her out at a party in October of their senior year, with enough casualness that it didn't feel like a big deal, which was exactly the point. Megan Sullivan had said yes so quickly she nearly choked on her cup of cheap beer, and she spent the rest of that party trying not to look at him too obviously, trying to seem like a girl who had things under control. She did not have things under control. She had never had things under control where Derek was concerned. Even then, even at 17, she knew this was dangerous. She knew she was the kind of girl who felt things too much and hid them too poorly and would probably end up with her heart on the floor of some parking lot, and she went out with him anyway, because what else was she going to do? Say no? To Derek Hollis? To the Derek Hollis? For 3 weeks, she floated. She did her homework and ate dinner with her parents and drove her younger brother to soccer practice, and all of it happened in a kind of golden haze, because she had a boyfriend, and his name was Derek Hollis, and he had looked at her in the hallway between 3rd and 4th period and said, "Hey, Meg," with a smile that made her feel like the most important person in the world. On the 3rd Saturday, he canceled their date. Something came up, he said. Family thing. He would make it up to her. He didn't say he was sorry. On the 5th Saturday, he canceled again. This time it was a friend from his soccer team, some playoff celebration. He texted her at 7 p.m, "Can't do tonight, rain check." She was already dressed, a new top she'd saved up for, mascara she'd practiced with until she got the wing right, and she sat on her bed and read his text 4 times and thought, this is it. This is how it starts. But it didn't start anything. Because she went out with him again the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and she pretended not to notice that he never planned the dates, never texted her first, never seemed to think about her at all when they weren't standing in front of each other. She pretended because pretending was easier than the alternative, which was admitting that she had given her heart to someone who didn't know what to do with it. The breakup happened via text message in April, 3 weeks before prom. He said they should talk. She said okay. He said, "I think we should see other people." She said, okay. He said nothing else. Neither did she. The conversation lasted 9 text messages and ended with her sitting in her car in the school parking lot, phone in her lap, staring at the word okay that she had typed twice and wishing she had typed something else. Something that would make him feel what she felt. Something that would make him understand. She went to prom with Tyler Brennan, who had asked her out of sympathy or friendship or both, and she danced with him and laughed at his jokes and told herself she was fine, and she did not cry, not once, not even when she saw Derek across the room slow dancing with a girl named Christine Marsh, who had been a freshman when Megan was a senior and who wore a dress that probably cost more than Megan's entire outfit. She did not cry. She danced. She smiled. She was fine. She was not fine. She would not be fine for a very long time. Part 1. The reunion. The invitation had sat on Megan's kitchen counter for 3 days before she finally RSVP'd yes. It was Tyler Brennan who had organized it, Tyler, who had been the glue of their high school friend group, the one who remembered everyone's birthday and texted out of the blue in 2017 with a message that read, simply, reunion dinner. September 14th. The Meridian. You have to come. Megan Sullivan had read the message while Brian was upstairs putting their daughter, Emma, to sleep. She had felt a small, cold stone drop into her stomach. Derek Hollis would be theirs. She hadn't spoken to him in 15 years. Had deliberately, methodically, trained herself not to think about him. She had married Brian when she was 25. She had met him through a dating app, the kind with the clever ads about finding your person, and on their first date at a wine bar in the short north, he had talked to her for 2 hours about his job, his family, his goal of running a half marathon, and at no point had she felt like she was waiting for him to say something else. He was warm. He was present. He was the kind of man who remembered to ask about her day and follow up and say things like, "I'm proud of you," without being asked. She had fallen in love with him the way you fall asleep, slowly, then all at once, and by the time she realized what had happened, it was already too late to be afraid. They had Emma 2 years after the wedding, and Liam 2 years after that, and somewhere in the chaos of double strollers and sleepless nights and first words and first steps, Megan had quietly, successfully, buried the memory of Derek Hollis. She did not think about him when she was brushing her teeth. She did not think about him when she was in the shower, or in traffic, or lying awake at 2 a.m. with a child attached to her breast. She did not think about him, and when people mentioned his name, which was almost never, she felt a small, distant flutter, like a heart palpitation, and she let it pass. She had told herself she was going for closure. That's what she wrote in her head as she stood in front of her closet that Friday afternoon, cycling through 4 different blouses. She told herself she was going to walk in, see him, confirm that the Derek Hollis she had once loved with such embarrassing totality was just a regular man now, maybe a little grayer, a little softer, with a wedding ring and a mortgage and a bad back, and that she would feel nothing. She told herself this, and she almost believed it. Brian helped her zip up the blue blouse. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing the back of her neck. "Have a good time. Tell Tyler I said hi." "I will," Megan said. She kissed him. She meant it. She did not tell Brian that she had changed outfits 4 times. She did not tell him that her hands had trembled applying mascara. She did not tell him that every molecule in her body felt like it was standing on the edge of something tall, and the wind was blowing, and she wasn't sure if she was going to step back or jump. She did not tell him any of this because there was nothing to tell. Derek was the past. Brian was the present. And Megan, 35 years old, mother of 2, wife of 10 years, was not the kind of woman who fell apart over a man she hadn't seen since Clinton was president. The Meridian was a mid-tier American restaurant in the short north district, not fancy enough to be uncomfortable, not cheap enough to be beneath them. The kind of place that served salmon and risotto and had a bar with 16 craft beers on tap. Megan arrived 7 minutes late on purpose, so she could walk in and scan the room before anyone could intercept her, so she could see him first and prepare, steel herself, become the woman she was now instead of the girl she had been. She saw Tyler first, waving enthusiastically from a long table near the back. Around him sat a constellation of faces she half recognized. Chen, whose hair was now professionally highlighted and whose laugh, Megan noticed, had gotten louder. Dated Park, who had lost most of his hair but gained a Rolex and a self-satisfied slump to his shoulders. And across the table, in a chair that faced the door, Derek. He looked up as she approached. He looked exactly the same and nothing like what she remembered. The same sharp jawline. The same way of holding eye contact like it was a challenge, like he was taking her measure and finding it interesting. His hair was shorter now, practical, and he wore a collared shirt, navy blue, that sewed him with a kind of ease that suggested he didn't have to think about what he looked like. He was a doctor. A fellow, technically, at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, specializing in internal medicine. Tyler had told her that in a follow-up text, the week after the invitation. Like it was incidental. Like it wasn't the most threatening piece of information a person could deliver about an ex-boyfriend. Megan Sullivan. Tyler stood and pulled her into a hug. "Oh my God, look at you. You look amazing." She performed the rounds. She hugged Michelle, who smelled like perfume that cost more than Megan spent on groceries in a week. She shook David's hand, which was clammy in a way that suggested he was nervous, which was strange because David Park had always been the most confident person in any room. She said all the things you say, "How long has it been, and you haven't changed at all, and tell me everything," while being acutely, excruciatingly aware of Derek's eyes on her, tracking her around the table like she was a person of interest. He didn't stand when she reached him. He looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Megan," he said. Just her name. Not Megan Sullivan like the others, not Meg, just Megan, the way he used to say it in the parking lot after school, when no one was listening, when it was just the two of them and the world was small enough to fit in a breath. "Hi, Derek," she said. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. It was not a request. She sat. The dinner was a blur of noise and laughter and the particular acoustics of a room full of people trying to be the best version of their former selves. Megan ate a salmon fillet she wouldn't remember later. She drank 2 glasses of Chardonnay, and then a third that appeared as if by magic when Tyler insisted on ordering another bottle. She answered questions about her life. Yes, married, 10 years to Brian, an IT analyst at a firm downtown. No kids yet. Well, 2 kids actually, Emma's 7 and Liam's 4. God, time flies. And she watched Derek from the corner of her vision. The way he held his glass, the way he smiled at other people's jokes without really laughing, the way his attention seemed to drift back to her every 30 seconds like a compass finding north. At one point, during a lull in conversation caused by Michelle's aggressive interrogation of David about his divorce, Derek leaned slightly toward her. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough for her to smell his cologne, something woodsy and clean, nothing like Brian's familiar drugstore deodorant smell, which she loved in the way you love things that are reliable and warm and always there when you need them. "You look good, Megan," he said, quietly. "You look like a doctor," she said, before she could stop herself. He laughed. A real one, she thought. Or something close to it. "I am a doctor," he said. "But I wasn't always." She knew what he meant. In high school, Derek Hollis had been brilliant but unmotivated, the kind of student who coasted on raw intelligence and drove teachers crazy with his laziness. He'd barely gotten into the University of Michigan, and even that had been a surprise. She remembered his mother's car in the school parking lot, parent-teacher conferences where Mrs. Hollis looked frustrated in a way that Megan, from a family where everyone worked hard and no one was special, couldn't quite understand. Something about a cousin who went to medical school. Something about Derek deciding, finally, in his late 20s, that he wanted to be useful. She didn't know the details. She had never asked, because asking would have meant admitting she still cared about the trajectory of his life, and she had trained herself not to do that. "Are you here for long?" she asked. "Permanent position starts in January," he said. "I'm doing a fellowship through the end of the year. 12 more weeks. 12 weeks. She did the math automatically, without meaning to. 12 weeks was 3 months. 3 months was long enough to destroy a life. She had seen enough daytime television and read enough women's magazines to know that an affair could start in less time than it took to grow a tomato plant. Around them, Tyler was orchestrating a toast. Glasses were raised. Megan lifted hers. She clinked against Michelle's, against David's, and finally, when Derek's glass met hers, their fingers brushed. Just barely. Just enough for her to feel it in her sternum, a small electric shock that had no business being there. She pulled her hand back. She took a sip of wine. She set the glass down. The stone in her stomach turned into a fist. After dinner, people migrated to the bar upstairs. Tyler insisted. "One more round, come on, we haven't been together in 15 years. The group shrank as the night wore on. Michelle had to get home to her kids. David had an early flight. 2 other couples peeled off with the particular exhaustion of people with real responsibilities, until it was just Megan and Derek and Tyler, 3 people at a high-top table, and Tyler was texting someone on his phone with a grin that suggested he was engineering this exact outcome. Megan checked her phone. Brian had texted, "How's it going? Kids are asleep. Save me some wine stories for tomorrow." She typed back, "Going great. Love you." Then she set the phone face down on the table. "I should probably head out," she said. It was 10:47 p.m. "I'll walk you," Derek said. It wasn't a question. Tyler was already looking at his phone, pointedly not looking at them, and the performance was so obvious that Megan almost laughed. Almost. They took the elevator down. Neither spoke. The restaurant's lobby was all brushed nickel and soft light, the kind of tasteful renovation that had happened to every old building in Columbus in the last 10 years, and Megan felt her pulse in her throat, which was ridiculous. She was 35 years old. She had 2 children. She was not the kind of person who got nervous around men. "Have you been okay?" Derek asked. They were standing near the entrance, the September night pressing against the glass doors behind them, the streetlights orange and hazy through the glass. "What kind of question is that?" "A normal one. I'm fine. I'm married. I have kids. I didn't ask about your husband." She looked at him. His face was unreadable. That was always the thing about Derek, you could never tell what he was thinking. With Bry, every emotion played across his face like weather across an open field. Brian was sunshine and rain and occasional clouds, and you always knew where you stood with him. Derek was a locked room. Derek was a safe with a combination he never gave you. "I should call an Uber," she said. "Don't," he said. "I'll take you." "That's not necessary." "Megan." He said her name the same way he used to, all those years ago. Like it was a door he was entitled to open. Like the fact that he knew her name meant something. "Let me take you home." She took the escalator down to the subway station. It was late enough that the platform was nearly empty, a couple on the far end holding hands, a man reading a newspaper, the fluorescent lights buzzing their idiot hum, an announcement crackling about a delay on the eastbound line. Derek stood beside her. They were close enough that their arms almost touched. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the sleeve of her blouse. The escalator descended. 40 seconds of slow descent through the guts of the building, the metal grating, the mechanical hum, the faint smell of machine oil and old carpet. Megan stared straight ahead at the tiled wall and the ad for a dermatology clinic, a before and after photo of someone's cheek, the promise of renewal in pixels. She felt the tears before she understood why they were coming. Hot if fast, completely involuntary, sliding down her cheeks in a way that her makeup, carefully applied, for outfit changes, all for this, could not possibly conceal. She was crying in public. She was crying on an escalator. She was crying in front of Daryl Hollis, who had cancelled on her 7 times in 3 months when she was 17 and who had broken up with her via text message and who had slow danced with Christine Marsh at prom while she stood on the other side of the room pretending not to watch. She cried the way she used to cry in high school after Derek cancelled plans for the 3rd time in a row, after he forgot her birthday, after she sent him a text saying, "I think we should talk," and he replied, "K." She cried the way she cried the night she decided she was done waiting for him to love her back. Done, or so she'd thought, done with Derek Hollis and his locked rooms and his silences and his gift for making her feel like she was too much and not enough at the same time. The escalator kept going down. 40 seconds. An eternity. She did not look at him. She could feel him next to her, solid and silent, not touching her, not apologizing, not leaving. The way he had always been. Present enough to keep her hoping. Absent enough to break her heart. The way you can't look at an eclipse because the damage is in the looking. She didn't look at him, and she cried, and the escalator kept going down. She did not look at him. She could feel him next to her, solid and silent, not touching her, not apologizing, not leaving. The way he had always been. Present enough to keep her hoping. Absent enough to break her heart. The escalator reached the bottom. She stepped off and wiped her face with the back of her hand. Pulled herself together the way women are trained to do, in bathrooms, in cars, in stairwells, in the 30 seconds before walking into a room where someone is waiting to see if you're falling apart. And she walked to the platform edge and checked the arrival time on the digital board. 4 minutes. Derek stood beside her. He still hadn't said a word. He had never been a man of many words, Derek. He communicated in silences and looks and the occasional text message that left her wondering for days what he meant. "My ride's here," she said, not looking up. "Okay," Derek said. She walked to the platform edge. The train came, the air pushing at her hair, the lights bright and familiar. She got on. She sat down and pressed her forehead against the cool window and didn't move until her stop, 3 stations later, and for the entire ride she replayed the last 15 years in her head, all the things she had built, all the walls she had put up, all the careful, deliberate distance she had maintained, and she felt every one of those walls crack, just a little, just enough. Derek Hollis had been in her life for exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes. He had cost her a decade of careful reconstruction. He had cost her an evening of pretending she was over it. He had cost her the escalator ride, which she would replay in her head for the next 3 months like a song she couldn't stop, a lane she couldn't stop picking, a door she couldn't close. Part 2. The door. She told Brian it was a lovely evening. She told him the food was mediocre and Tyler looked great and Michelle's highlights were a lot and Derek was there but they'd barely talked, just nodded hello like civilized adults. She said his name casually, like it was nothing, like it didn't sit in her mouth like a stone, like it didn't taste like 1999. "Oh, yeah? How's Derek?" Brian asked, already half asleep, his arm draped over her side of the bed. He was warm and solid and familiar, and she felt a rush of love for him so intense it almost made her cry again, which would have been a disaster, because how would she explain crying twice in one night? Good. He's a doctor now. Internal medicine. Very impressive. Nice. Good for him. Brian was asleep 11 seconds later. Brian slept the way he did everything, quickly, thoroughly, without fanfare. He had never had trouble sleeping. He had once told her, during a conversation about their childhoods, that he'd never had a sleepless night in his life. Megan had been incredulous. She had been having sleepless nights since she was 14, mostly about things she couldn't control. Megan lay in the dark beside him and listened to him breathe and thought, this is my life. This is my actual life. Husband, 2 kids, house in the suburbs, minivan in the driveway. The whole middle-class American dream, assembled piece by piece over 15 years. She had a good life. She knew she had a good life. Everyone kept telling her she had a good life. She thought about Derek's cologne, the woodsy clean smell of it. She thought about how Brian smelled like the drugstore deodorant he used and the laundry detergent they bought in bulk at Costco, and sometimes, after a long day, like the particular warmth of his own skin. She thought about how she had never once, in 10 years of marriage, felt her pulse in her throat when Brian walked into a room. She was not supposed to think things like that. She knew that. Good wives did not compare the cologne of their ex-boyfriends to the deodorant of their husbands. Good wives were grateful. Good wives were brazen. Good wives did not cry on escalators in front of men who had broken their hearts 15 years ago and showed no signs of having changed. She had not planned to see Derek again. She had not planned any of what happens next. She had gone to a reunion dinner, seen her ex-boyfriend, cried on an escalator in front of him, and come home to her husband, and that was supposed to be the end of it. A neat, tragic little story she could tell at future reunions, in the version of her life where she was the kind of person who had survived things and moved on. Oh, Derek Hollis, yes, I ran into him a few years back. Can you believe it? I cried on the escalator like a complete disaster. Thank God I never have to see him again. Except she did have to see him again. Or at least, that was what she told herself. Because 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning that was gray and unremarkable, threatening rain that never came, Megan got a text from an unknown number. It's Derek. Tyler's not great at keeping contact info private. Coffee sometime? She stared at the message for 11 minutes. She read it 40 times. She could not tell if it was an innocent request between old acquaintances, the kind of thing that happened at reunions, people reconnecting, adding each other on Facebook, forming the gentle social settlement of a life half-lived, or something else entirely. That was Derek's gift. He could make everything ambiguous. He could make a simple cup of coffee feel like a loaded weapon. He could make a text message feel like a dare. Brian was at work. The kids were at school. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses are quiet when you are the only person in them, the clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, the world going on outside your windows without you. Megan sat at her kitchen table in her bathrobe at 9:47 a.m. and typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Finally, she wrote back, sure. When? He replied in 4 minutes. Friday. 7 p.m. Archview Cafe. Okay. She put the phone down. She poured herself a second cup of coffee. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the ordinary street, Mrs. Patterson walking her golden retriever, the Kowalski kids riding bikes, the same maple tree that had been on this block since before she moved in, and she thought, I am going to destroy my life. She did not think, I shouldn't do this. She did not think, I love my husband. She thought only, I am going to destroy my life, and then she finished her coffee and went to get dressed, because what else was she going to do? She was already in motion. She was already falling. Friday came. She told Brian she was meeting a friend from the reunion, Michelle, she said. And Brian said, tell her hi from me without looking up from his laptop. She put on jeans and a green sweater and minimal makeup. She was meeting an old friend, nothing special, no reason to try too hard. She drove to Archview Cafe, which was in the Arts District, far enough from her neighborhood that she felt the particular thrill of doing something no one would ever know about, the small electric pleasure of secrets. Derek was already there. He had a corner booth and 2 cups of coffee on the table. He'd ordered for both of them, which was either thoughtful or presumptuous, and with Derek you never knew which. He stood when she walked in, an old-fashioned gesture that caught her off guard, because men didn't really do that anymore. Stand for women, pull out chairs. And he pulled out the chair across from him, and she sat and felt the particular awkwardness of being alone in a public place with a man who was not her husband. "You look less sad than Tuesday," he said. "That was 14 seconds of my life." I counted. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup he'd bought her. Black, no sugar, room for cream. He remembered. She didn't know why that made her feel worse, that he remembered, that he'd noticed, that he'd thought about her enough to remember the way she took her coffee. Brian didn't remember how she took her coffee. Brian probably didn't know how she took her coffee, not specifically, not down to the ratio of cream to darkness. Brian just knew she drank coffee and that she was sometimes snippy before she'd had it, and that was the extent of his interest in the subject. "How's the fellowship?" she asked, because she had to say something. "It's fine. Long hours. Residency was harder." He paused. "You never told me. 2 kids. Boy and a girl? How do you know that?" "Tyler. He's proud of you, you know. Talks about you like you're the one who got away." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" She looked at him. The cafe was warm and poorly lit and smelled like roasted espresso, and Derek was looking at her with an expression she had never been able to decode, not in high school, not at the reunion, not now. Interest, maybe. Or curiosity. Or the particular hunger of a man who had always known he could have anything he wanted and was simply deciding whether to want her. "You're married," Megan said. "I am." "To who?" "Sarah. She's a pharmacist. We met at the hospital." "Do you love her?" The question came out sharper than she intended. She winced internally. She sounded exactly like the kind of woman she had always despised, the desperate ex-girlfriend, the obsessive, the one who couldn't let go and couldn't move on and showed up at coffee shops demanding to know why other women got to have what she didn't. She hated that voice in herself. She had spent 15 years trying to silence it. Derek took a sip of his coffee. He didn't answer right away. That was another one of his tricks, the deliberate silence, the weighted pause. He made you wait. He made you fill the silence with your own anxiety, your own conclusions, your own worst fears about what he was thinking and why he wasn't saying it. He had done this to her in high school, and he was doing it to her now, and the terrible thing was that it still worked. "She's a good person," he said finally. "That wasn't what I asked." "No," Derek said. "It wasn't." They talked for 2 hours. About nothing and everything. About the old days, the football games, the parties at Tyler's lake house, the time Megan got food poisoning at the state championship and Derek drove her to urgent care and waited in the parking lot for 3 hours without complaining. She had thought, at the time, that this meant something. That the fact that he waited meant that he cared, that he was showing up in the only way he knew how. Later she had realized he probably just didn't have anything better to do. About their lives now, the hospital for him, the marketing firm for her, the manageable chaos of raising small children for both. They did not talk about the things that mattered. They did not talk about why he had texted her. They did not talk about the escalator. They talked about surface things the way 2 people do when they both know there's something underneath and neither is brave enough to go there. When they left, Derek walked her to her car. It was parked on a side street, and the evening was cold, and their breath made small clouds in the air between them, and for a moment they stood there in the orange glow of the streetlight like characters in a movie she had seen before and didn't like the ending of. "I'm glad I saw you," Derek said, "even though I cried like a child. Especially because of that." She didn't know what to say to that. She unlocked her car door and stood there, not getting in, caught between the door and the frame, between the car and the street in the evening and everything she was supposed to be doing instead of standing here. "Derek." "Yeah?" She didn't know what she was going to say. She had opened her mouth to say something, to say goodbye, to say don't call me, to say I shouldn't have come, to say I never stopped, and nothing came out. He waited. He had always been good at waiting. That was his thing. He could wait longer than anyone, wait you out until you broke first, until you filled the silence with whatever you were most afraid of. "I should go," she said. "Okay." She drove home. Brian had left the porch light on, a small orange beacon in the dark. The house was warm and smelled like the lasagna she'd put in the crock pot that morning, oregano and tomatoes and the memory of her mother's recipe. Brian was on the couch with Liam asleep on his chest, watching a movie with the volume low, and the sight of them, her husband and her son, tangled together, breathing in sync, made her feel something she couldn't name. Something too big for the room. She stood in the doorway and watched them and felt something crack open in her chest. Not guilt, exactly. Something older. Something that had been waiting. She went upstairs. She checked on Emma, who was indeed reading with a flashlight, the covers pulled up to her chin, a flashlight pressed against the page like a secret. She stood in the doorway and watched her daughter read, the way her lips moved slightly, the way her brow furrowed at a difficult passage, and she felt a love so fierce it made her hands shake. She would burn the world down for this child. She would walk into traffic. She would do anything. She would not destroy her family for Derek Hollis. She would not. She went into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror, 35 years old, tired eyes, a small line between her brows that hadn't been there 5 years ago, the first faint evidence of time doing what time does, and she thought, what am I doing? She did not have an answer. She brushed her teeth. She went to bed. She lay in the dark next to Brian and listened to him breathe and told herself she would not see Derek again. She saw Derek again. Part 3, midnight. She went to his apartment on a Wednesday. She had not planned Wednesday. She had planned, vaguely, to never see Derek again. She had deleted his number from her phone, or tried to, except she typed it in manually to send a final, dignified message saying something like, "I think we should keep our distance, for everyone's sake," and then she hadn't sent it, had just left it sitting there in her phone like a loaded gun, because sending it would have meant admitting that she wanted to keep her distance and she wasn't sure she did. Wednesday, Brian had a work dinner. A client dinner, he said, at a steakhouse downtown, probably won't be home before 11. Megan said have a good time and kissed him and felt nothing. Or felt everything and called it nothing because calling it something was too dangerous, too close to the truth, too much like admitting that she had spent the last 4 days thinking about Derek's cologne and Derek's silence and Derek's face at the coffee shop and the way he had said, especially because of that, like her tears were a gift he was grateful to receive. The kids were at her mother's, a standing Wednesday arrangement, grandma night, the kids called it, which meant movies and microwave popcorn and staying up past their bedtimes, and which Megan had arranged specifically so that she would have time to herself, time to think, time to be a person who wasn't just mom. She sat on the couch and watched a half hour of television, something on Netflix she wouldn't remember later, and then she turned it off and sat in the dark and listened to the house settle around her. The creak of the old radiator. the hum of the refrigerator, the particular silence of a home when no one else is in it. At 9:15, she put on her coat. She didn't call first. She didn't text. She drove to Columbus, 40 minutes if traffic was light, 50 if it wasn't, and she used the GPS on her phone, because she didn't actually know where Derek lived, and this was apparently the one boundary she was still capable of maintaining. She would go to his apartment, but she wouldn't know the address until the moment she was already going there, and that made it feel less like a choice and more like an accident, which made it feel less like something she was doing and more like something that was happening to her. She arrived at his building at 9:52 p.m. It was a mid-rise apartment complex in the University District, the kind of building occupied mostly by young professionals and graduate students, people who were in town for a few years and would probably leave again, people whose lives were temporary. She parked on the street. She sat in her car for 11 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, watching the windows of the building. A few lights on, a few lights off. No way to tell which window was his. She got out of the car. She walked to the entrance. She buzzed his apartment, 412, and waited. Yeah. His voice through the intercom, tinny and distant. It's me. A pause. Then the door buzzed open. She went up. 4th floor. She walked down the hallway, beige carpet, beige walls, the universal aesthetic of buildings that were trying not to offend, and she stopped in front of his door and stood there for what felt like an hour and what was probably 90 seconds, and she thought about all the reasons she should leave, all the reasons she shouldn't knock, all the reasons this was a terrible idea that would end badly for everyone involved. She knocked. He opened the door wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, a book in his hand, something thick and medical, something she wouldn't understand. He looked at her. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting, in the way that Derek always looked like he was waiting, like he had all the time in the world and was simply allowing events to unfold at their own pace. "Megan," he said. "Hi. Come in." She came in. The apartment was neat in a way that said either a person was naturally organized or a person didn't live here enough to mess it up. A couch, a desk with a laptop, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. A single mug in the sink. A medical journal open on the counter. A bed visible through a half-open door, made with hospital corners, like a man who had trained himself to make beds in a specific way and would never deviate from it. "Sit down," Derek said. "Do you want something to drink?" "Water." He got her water. She sat on his couch and pressed her hands into her knees and tried to remember why she had come here. The reasons she'd rehearsed in the car. She wanted to see him. She wanted to understand. She wanted to know if the escalator had meant something or nothing, collapsed into each other and became nothing. She was here because she couldn't not be here. That was the whole truth. That was the only truth. She was here because some part of her had been walking toward this door since she was 17 years old and had never stopped. Derek sat beside her. Not close, but closer than he needed to. "Your husband thinks you're working late," he said. "How do you know that?" "Because you told me on Tuesday that you told him that. When you called me." She had called him. On Tuesday night. After Brian went to sleep, after the house was dark and the kids were asleep and Megan was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, she'd picked up her phone and dialed his number. A string of digits she had memorized in 1999 and had never quite managed to forget. He answered on the 4th ring, and she hadn't said anything. She just breathed. And he'd breathed back. And then she'd hung up and put the phone down and lain there in the dark and told herself it meant nothing. "I don't know why I'm here," she said. "Yes, you do. Derek, please." "Please what?" She looked at him. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the muffled sound of traffic, a car alarm in the distance going off and then stopping, the hum of the building's heating system. Inside, the sound of her own heartbeat, which she was certain he could hear, which was embarrassing and revealing and exactly the kind of vulnerability she had spent 15 years trying to bury. He kissed her first. Or she kissed him first. She would never be entirely sure which. Later, she would tell herself it was mutual. She would need to believe that, for reasons of her own sanity, but the truth was Messier. The truth was that one moment they were sitting on his couch 2 feet apart, and the next his hand was on the back of her neck and his mouth was on hers, and she was pulling him toward her with a desperation she had buried for 15 years, and it felt like waking up, and it felt like dying, and she couldn't tell the difference. He tasted like black coffee. He kissed the way he did everything, with a kind of focused intensity that made her feel like she was the only thing in the world he was thinking about. Which was probably true for 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. Not longer. She pulled back. "We can't do this." "We're already doing it," Derek said. He was right. That was the thing about Derek, he was always right, in the way that made you hate him and want him. At the same time, she hated that she wanted him. She hated that wanting him felt better than anything Brian had ever done for her, better than Brian's patient hands, Brian's reliable warmth, Brian's "I love you too" that came so easily and meant so little, at least compared to this. She hated that her body responded to Derek with a kind of animal recognition that her mind had never managed to override, the way your body knows to flinch before your brain has registered the danger. They didn't have sex that night. He made her stop, pulled back, held her at arm's length, looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Not like this," he said. "Not if you're going to regret it." She almost laughed. Derek Hollis worried about her regret. Derek Hollis, who had never once, in all the years she knew him, seemed concerned about her feelings. "You're worried I'll regret it," she said. "I'm worried you'll blame me." She left. She drove home in the dark, 40 minutes through Columbus side streets because she couldn't concentrate enough for the highway. And she thought about his mouth and his hands and the way he had said, "Not if you're going to regret it," like he was a different person than the boy who had broken her heart via text message in 1999. She lay in bed next to Brian and stared at the ceiling and felt like she had been opened up and left out in the cold. She went to sleep eventually. She dreamed of Derek's apartment, the beige wall, the medical journal, the made bed with hospital corners, and she woke up at 3 a.m. with her heart racing and her sheets tangled around her legs in a single, annihilating thought, "I have to go back." She went back. On Friday. And then again on Monday. And then it became a pattern, 2 nights a week, sometimes 3, always when Brian was working late or the kids were at her mother's or there was some other plausible fiction she could tell herself in the bathroom mirror before she left. She had become an expert in plausible fictions. She had become fluent in the language of lies. Derek's apartment was always clean. Derek was always available, or seemed to be, though she knew, in the part of her mind that was still capable of rational thought, that a man who was always available was a man who had nothing else to be available for. Derek kissed her like he meant it. Derek touched her like he knew her body better than she did. And Derek, most nights, made her come so hard she saw white behind her eyes, which was not something Brian had ever managed, not in 10 years of trying, not with his patient and loving and utterly unimaginative approach to her pleasure. She understood she was being used. She was not naive. Derek was not in love with her. Derek was not even particularly interested in her as a person, not who she was now, not the Megan who had married and mothered and built a life, but the Megan from high school, the one who had been so desperate for his attention that she would have done anything. He was interested in that Megan. He was interested in the echo of her, the memory of her, the fact that she had survived him and come back. She was being used sexually, and she kept coming back because the alternative, going home to her real life, to Brian and the kids and the minivan and the mortgage, felt like drowning, and Derek's apartment felt like the first breath after. On their fourth night together, a Tuesday, a rainy Tuesday in early October, the rain tapping on Derek's windows like fingers. Trying to get in, Derek gave her a gift. A white box with an Apple logo on the top, sitting on the kitchen counter when she arrived. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was an iPhone. The latest model. Still in the box, still sealed, the screen protector already applied. It was the kind of gift a man gives a woman when he doesn't know what else to give her, when words aren't enough and sex isn't enough and he needs to prove something with money, with objects, was the particular language of people who don't know how to say what they mean. "Derek, this is too much. It's a phone. You needed one. My phone is fine. Your phone is 3 years old and the battery dies after 4 hours." He was right. He was annoyingly right, and she hated that he was right, and she hated more that she was standing in his kitchen accepting a $400 gift like it was nothing, like it didn't mean anything, like she wasn't already in so deep that accepting gifts was just another line she had crossed without meaning to. She took the phone. She told herself she would pay him back for it. She told herself a lot of things. She never paid him back. Part 4. The cracks, the lies had become structural now. They were load-bearing. She could not remove them without the whole architecture collapsing. She had told Brian she was working late 14 times in 6 weeks. She had told him she was at Michelle, whose number she had looked up and texted and arranged a single coffee with so she would have a real alibi, a place she could describe in enough detail to be believable. She had told her mother she was picking up extra freelance projects at work, which was technically true in the sense that she was certainly doing something at night that involved sitting at a desk and concentrating very hard, except the desk was Derek's kitchen counter and the work was the slow dismantling of her marriage. She was at Derek's on a Thursday when Brian texted her a picture. It was Liam at his first t-ball practice, grinning, dirt on his face, holding the bat like a weapon he didn't know how to use yet. The caption said, "Little man's first hit. He's a natural." Derek was beside her on the couch, his hand on her thigh, and she looked at the picture of her son, her 4-year-old son, with his serious face and his serious concentration and his absolute faith that his mother was where she was supposed to be, and she felt a grief so sudden and total that she couldn't breathe. This was her life. This was her actual life. And she was throwing it away for a man who had never once, in all their nights together, said the words "I love you." She said it to him sometimes. When she was drunk on his attention, or on wine from the bottle he kept in the cabinet for her, or on the particular delirium of being wanted by someone who was incapable of wanting her back. "I love you, Derek." She'd say it into his shoulder, into his neck, into the dark of his bedroom with the hospital corners, and he would hold her. He would hold her and say nothing. And in the morning, when she replayed it in her head, she would realize that the silence was the answer. That some silences are louder than words. That Derek would never love her, had probably never loved her, and that she was doing exactly what she had done at 17, giving her heart to someone who didn't know what to do with it. She didn't reply to Brian's text for 2 hours. When she finally got home, she said, She'd left her phone in the car. Brian said no worries. Liam ran to her and hugged her leg, and she picked him up and buried her face in his hair. Sunscreen and grass and the particular smell of her son, the smell that no one else in the world had, and she thought, I have to stop. I have to stop. I have to stop. She did not stop. She went back on Saturday. Brian found the messages on a Saturday morning in November. Megan was in the shower. Brian was making breakfast, pancakes, the kind with the smiley face that Liam loved, the chocolate chips arranged as eyes and a mouth, a small act of creativity in an otherwise ordinary morning. He was scrolling through Megan's phone because he was looking for a recipe she had sent him the day before, some variation on the pancakes, something with blueberries that Emma had requested, and he clicked on the Messages app by accident, or maybe by instinct, the part of a person that knows something is wrong before the mind catches up. Except the messages weren't on the recipe thread. They were on the main Messages app, a conversation he didn't recognize, and he opened it because he was confused, because who was this person? Because why was his wife texting someone he didn't know late at night? And then he stood in the kitchen holding Megan's phone with the batter still on his whisk and read every single word. The conversation was not long. It was not passionate or revealing or even particularly intimate. It was a series of logistics. Are you home? Yes. I'm coming over. Okay. And the timestamps, which told the story in their own way. Tuesdays and Fridays. Wednesdays when Brian worked late. A pattern as clear and damning as a fingerprint. Megan came downstairs with wet hair and a towel around her shoulders. She was thinking about the night before, Derek's hands, Derek's mouth, the way he had looked at her when she said I love you, and she was thinking about Brian, too, in the way she always thought about Brian now, with a kind of distant guilt, a background hum of wrongness that she had learned to tune out. She was thinking about how she needed to be better, to try harder, to find some way to feel for Brian what she had once felt before Derek had come back and reminded her what wanting felt like. She saw Brian standing in the kitchen holding her phone. His face was the face of a man who had just watched something terrible happen. His face was the face of a man whose world had just shifted 4 inches to the left, and who was only now noticing the crack in the ceiling. Meg, he said. She knew. The way you know when a glass is about to fall and shatter, not the impact, but the half-second before, when physics has already decided and you are simply waiting for confirmation. She knew, and she felt her stomach drop, and she felt the towel around her shoulders suddenly feel very thin, very inadequate, like armor that had failed. Brian. Who is Derek? The name in his mouth, Derek, sounded foreign. Wrong. Like a word in a language he didn't speak, a name from a story she had never told him, a door she had locked and hoped he would never find. He's no one. It's not what it looks like. Then what is it? She could see it in his eyes. Not anger, not yet. The thing before anger, the thing that was worse than anger, the look of a man who had just realized his life was not what he thought it was. The look of a man whose foundation had shifted and who was only now standing herein. The kitchen with blueberry batter on his whisk, noticing that the picture frames on the wall were slightly crooked. Brian, please. Can we talk about this? We're talking. It's over. Whatever it was, it's over. I ended it. When did you end it, Megan? She couldn't answer because she hadn't ended it. She was still in it. She was still in Derek's apartment 4 nights a week, still wearing the iPhone he'd given her like a leash, still telling him she loved him and hearing nothing back. She was still in it in the way that you are in something you cannot get out of, like a riptide, like a bad dream, like a marriage you no longer deserve. I didn't sleep with him, she said. The lie came out automatically, reflexively, the way her body produced adrenaline, without thought, without consent, without any regard for what it would do to her later, when the truth came out, as it always did, because lies were just truth deferred and the interest rate on deception was always higher than you expected. Brian looked at her. He was quiet for a long time. Then he put the phone down on the counter, carefully, like it was something fragile, like it was evidence of something he didn't want to break. I made pancakes, he said. He walked out of the kitchen. He went upstairs. She heard the bedroom door close, not slammed, not hard, just closed, with a soft click that sounded like the end of something. She stood in the kitchen alone, in the house she had lived in for 8 years, in the kitchen she had painted 2 summers ago, the pale yellow she had chosen because Brian said it reminded him of sunshine, and she had wanted to be the kind of wife who reminded her husband of sunshine, and she listened to the silence and she thought, I have done this. I have done this with my own hands. And there is no one to blame and no way to undo it and no apology large enough to fill the space where trust used to live. She stood there for 20 minutes. Then she went upstairs and knocked on the bedroom door. Brian. No answer. Brian, please. The door opened. He was sitting on the edge of the bed. He wasn't crying. Brian didn't cry easily. He'd held it together at his father's funeral, at Emma's hospitalization when she was 2, at every crisis that required steel. But his eyes were red and his jaw was tight, and he looked at her with a sadness so profound that she wanted to crawl out of her own skin, to leave her body and go somewhere else, somewhere she didn't have to be the person who had done this. I trusted you, he said. I trusted you completely. I know. How long? She told him. She told him everything, the reunion, the escalator, the phone call, the nights, the iPhone, the things she'd said to Derek that she could never take back. She told him and he listened and he didn't interrupt, and when she was finished he said, I think you should leave, and his voice was steady and quiet and absolutely destroyed, and she left. She drove to her mother's house. She told her mother she and Brian were having marital problems, which was true in the way that a heart attack is true when you're the one having it, technically accurate, catastrophically undersold. Her mother held her and said, oh, honey, and Megan cried and said nothing about Derek, nothing about the real reason, because the real reason was unspeakable, a thing that could not be put into words without the words becoming weapons. She stayed at her mother's for 3 days. Brian texted her once on the 2nd day, I need time to think. She texted back, I understand. I'm so sorry. And then she put the phone down and stared at the wall and felt the full, nauseating weight of what she had done, not just the affair, but everything it implied, everything it meant about who she was, what she was capable of, how far she had fallen from the woman she had thought she was. On the 3rd night, she couldn't stand it anymore. She drove to Derek's apartment. She knocked on his door. He opened it and looked at her and said, Are you okay? And she said, No, and she walked in and she fell apart on his couch, crying the way she had cried on the escalator, great racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her body, from some place she had sealed off years ago and had never opened until Derek came back and broke the seal. Derek held her. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just held her, and his body was warm and solid, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, which was the most terrible thing of all, because she knew, in that moment, that this was the lie she was choosing over the truth of her life. She fell asleep on his couch that night. In the morning, she woke up alone, and Derek was at the kitchen table with his laptop, reading something medical, and he looked up and said, There's coffee, and she drank it and went home, because she didn't know what else to do. She went home and Brian was there and he was making dinner, not for her, she realized, but for himself, for the kids, for the life that was still happening whether she was in it or not, and he looked at her and said, "We need to talk." And they sat at the kitchen table and he said, "I don't know how to get past this," and Megan said, "I don't either." They did not get a divorce. They did not separate. They did not go to counseling, though Brian mentioned it twice and Megan deflected both times because the idea of sitting in a room with a stranger and explaining what she had done made her want to disappear into the earth. Instead, they entered a kind of purgatory. A gray, careful existence where they were both present but neither was really there. Brian slept in the guest room for 2 months. He was polite to her. He was functional with the kids. He asked her about her day and she asked about his, and they maintained the infrastructure of a marriage the way you maintain a house after a fire, boarded up, standing, but not safe to live in. Megan went back to Derek. Of course she did. She was not strong enough to stop. She went back to him the way a person returns to a wound, picking at it, making it worse, unable to leave it alone. She went back and he was the same warm, attentive, absent, unknowable, and she told herself she loved him and he never said it back and she kept coming back anyway, because the alternative was facing the wreckage she had made of her real life, and she wasn't ready for that, not yet, maybe not ever. Part 5. The abyss. Winter came to Columbus with a kind of malice. The trees went bare. Snow dusted the sidewalks and didn't melt. The days got shorter and darker and the house felt smaller and the walls felt closer and Megan felt herself disappearing, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, the way a photograph fades when you leave it in the sun. She was there but she wasn't. She fed the kids and drove them to school and showed up. At work she sat at her desk and performed the functions of her job, marketing campaigns, client reports, quarterly projections, the language of commerce that had once felt meaningful and now felt like a costume she was wearing, and inside she was hollow. She was a shell. She was a woman walking around in a life that no longer fit her, like a coat that had been made for someone else and handed down without asking. She was sleeping with Derek 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. She was lying to Brian with the same automatic ease of breathing. She was losing weight, not intentionally, just the natural byproduct of running on adrenaline and wine and the particular metabolism of shame. Her jeans were loose. Her collarbones showed through her blouses. Brian noticed and said, "You look tired," and she said, "I've been stressed about work," and he said nothing because he had stopped asking questions. She started running. Not ellipticals at the gym, actual running, on the street, in the cold, headphones in, pushing her body until her lungs burned and her legs ached and she couldn't think about anything except the next step, the next step, the next step. She ran 3 miles a day, then 5, then 7. She ran in the dark, in the snow, in the wind that came off the river and cut through her running tights like a blade. She ran like she was being chased. She ran like if she could just outrun the guilt long enough, it would give up and leave her alone. It didn't leave her alone. It ran alongside her, keeping pace, never more than a few steps behind. She started having panic attacks. Small ones at first, a tightness in her chest on the drive to work, a feeling that the walls were closing in during a meeting, a sudden, irrational fear that she was going to pass out in the middle of the grocery store, in front of the cereal aisle, surrounded by people buying milk and bread and not understanding that she was falling apart in real time. Then bigger ones. The kind where she couldn't breathe. The kind where she sat in her car in a parking garage and pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and counted to 10 and tried to remember what her life had felt like before Derek. Before Derek, she had been unhappy in a manageable way. She had been a woman in a comfortable marriage who sometimes wondered if there was more passion, more excitement, more of whatever it was that other people seemed to have and she did not. She had been fine. She had been good even. She had had a husband who loved her and children who needed her and a house in a neighborhood where people waved from their porches, and that was enough. That should have been enough. And then Derek had walked back into her life, and he had shown her exactly how much not enough it had always been, and she hated him for it. She hated him the way you hate the mirror that shows you what you really look like. She hated him for making her feel alive and then leaving her to deal with the aftermath alone. She hated him, and she went back to him every single time, because hate and love were not opposites, they were the same thing, wearing different clothes, and she had never learned the difference. The confrontation that broke her, the real one, the final one, happened on a Thursday night in February. Ryan was supposed to be at work, but the client dinner was cancelled, and he came home early, and he found Megan in the bathroom getting dressed. She was wearing the black dress, the one she only wore for Derek, the one she bought in September and never worn in front of Brian, and she was putting on mascara, and she was crying. Not dramatically, not loudly, just crying, with mascara running, with her hands shaking, with the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been crying for months and cannot remember what it felt like to stop. Brian stood in the doorway. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, at the dress, at the mascara, at the coat already laid out on the bed, at all the evidence of a plan in motion, a night she had been planning for 3 days, and he understood. "You're going to see him," Brian said. "Brian, are you?" She couldn't lie. She couldn't do it. She had lied to him for 5 months, and she was so tired of lying that she just stood there with the mascared wand in her hand and said, "Yes." Brian nodded. He turned around. He walked downstairs. Megan heard the front door open and close. She heard his car start and pull out of the driveway, his car, the car he drove to work, the car she had ridden in thousands of times, the car that represented everything she was about to lose. She stood in the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman she did not recognize, thin, haunted, red-eyed, wearing a black dress for a man who would never love her, standing in a bathroom in a house she was about to lose. She went to Derek's anyway. She didn't know what else to do. She went to his apartment and she knocked and he opened the door and she walked in and she said, "I'm losing my family." And Derek said, "I know." And she said, "You don't care." And he said, "I do care." And she said, "Prove it. Tell me you love me. Say it. One time. Just once." Derek looked at her. He was standing in his living room, in his immaculate apartment, with his medical journals and his expensive coffee and his perfectly made bed visible through the half-open door, and he looked at her with an expression she had seen before, on the escalator, in the parking lot after the prompt she hadn't attended with him, in all the moments when he could have said something and chose to say nothing instead. "Megan," he said. "Say it. I care about you." "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. He didn't say it. She had known he wouldn't say it. She had always known. That was the nature of Derek. He was a black hole dressed in a collared shirt, and you could orbit him forever, and you could fall into him, and you could lose yourself inside him, but you would never, ever get back what you gave. He was 17 and 35 at the same time, frozen in the moment before he had learned how to feel something for someone else, and she had spent her entire adult life trying to thaw him out, and it hadn't worked, and it wasn't going to work, because some people were built to give and some people were built to take, and Derek was built to take and Megan was built to give, and they had found each other at the wrong time and the wrong place and had made exactly the wrong decision about what. to do next. She left. She drove home in the dark, on roads that were icy in places. The temperature had dropped while she was at Derek's, and the world had gone cold and slick. And she thought about the dark and the cold and the fact that she was going 50 miles an hour in a car she couldn't afford to crash because she had 2 children at home and a husband who deserved better and a life that was falling apart around her and no one to call. She got home at midnight. Brian's car was in the driveway. The house was dark except for the porch light, that small orange glow that had always meant home and safety and the end of the day. She went inside. Brian was on the couch, in the dark, watching television with the sound off. He looked up when she came in. "Hi," she said. "Hi. I didn't go inside. I drove there and I sat outside and I came back." "Okay." She stood in the doorway. She was still wearing the black dress. Her feet were bare. She'd taken off her heels in the car because her feet hurt. She looked like a ghost. She felt like one. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know. I don't know how to stop." Brian turned off the television. The room went dark except for the streetlight coming through the blinds. He sat there in the dark and she stood in the doorway, and between them was everything: 10 years of marriage, 2 children, a house, a life, and also Derek, and also the escalator, and also all the nights she had driven to his apartment, and all the lies she had told, and all the times she had said "I love you" to a man who could not say it back. "I don't know how to stop either," Brian said. "But I think you have to. Because if you don't, I'm going to have to leave. And I don't want to leave." He didn't say it threateningly. He said it the way he said everything, plainly, honestly, without drama. And that made it worse. That made it real. That made Megan understand that this was not a scene from a movie, not a moment of dramatic tension that would resolve itself in the next 5 minutes with the right words or the right apology. This was her actual life, and she was losing it, and the only person who could save it was her. She sat down next to him on the couch. She put her head on his shoulder. He didn't move away. He didn't put his arm around her. But he didn't move away either, and that was something. That was a door that wasn't quite closed. She sat there with him until 2 a.m. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They were 2 people who had been married for 10 years and were only now discovering what that actually meant. Not the wedding, not the vows, not the idea of marriage, but the actual daily terrifying work of choosing someone. Of choosing them again and again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. She fell asleep on the couch. He went to bed. In the morning, she woke up with a crick in her neck and the sunlight coming through the blinds and the smell of coffee from the kitchen, and she lay there for a moment and felt the full weight of her life, the good parts and the terrible parts and all the parts in between, and she thought, "I have to choose." Part 6. The choice. She did not go back to Derek. Not that day. Not the next day. Not the day after that. It was not a dramatic decision. There was no moment of clarity, no thunderclap, no revelation, no moment where the clouds parted and a beam of light came down and a voice said, "This is the way." There was simply the weight of what she had done and the weight of what she stood to lose, and one morning she woke up and the scale tipped. The weight of losing her family felt heavier than the pull of Derek's gravity, heavier by just a few ounces, just enough. And she stayed. She went to therapy. Individual therapy, twice a week, with a woman named Dr. Anita Okafor, who had a calm office in Bexley with good natural light and a particular talent for asking questions that Megan didn't want to answer. Dr. Okafor didn't judge her. Dr. Okafor didn't tell her she was a bad person. Dr. Okafor just sat in her chair with her notebook and her attentive eyes and asked Megan to look at things, at her marriage, at her choices, at Derek, at the pattern she had followed her entire adult life, which was love someone who couldn't love her back, and then hate herself for it. "Why do you think you keep doing this?" Dr. Okafor asked in the third session. "I don't know. Because I think I deserve it." "Deserve what?" "To want something I can't have. To be with someone who doesn't want me." "Why do you think you deserve that?" Megan didn't answer. She looked at the window. It was March now, almost spring, and the trees outside were starting to bud, faint green, tentative, the world deciding to try again after a long winter. She watched the buds and thought about how trees did this every year, shed everything and start over, and how miraculous that was, and how painful, and how necessary. "Because Derek told me once, in high school, that I was too much," she said. "He said I was too intense, too needy, too all in. And I remember thinking that if I could just be less, if I could just want less, he would love me. And I've been trying to be less ever since. With everyone. With Brian, too. I've been holding back. Because I think if I let myself be all the way in, I'll be too much and they'll leave." Dr. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And how has that been working for you?" Megan laughed. It came out surprised and raw and a little broken, and she covered her mouth and laughed until she cried, and Dr. Okafor handed her the box of tissues and let her. Brian went to therapy too, eventually. Not because Megan asked him to. She was afraid to ask him for anything, for a long time, afraid that anything she asked would be one thing too many, the thing that finally made him leave, but because he decided to on his own. He saw a therapist named Dr. Reiner, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who, Brian reported, mostly just listened. "What do you talk about?" Megan asked, carefully, not wanting to push, not wanting to make it seem like she was interrogating him. "He asks me how I'm feeling about things. I tell him I'm angry. He asks me what else. I tell him I'm sad. He asks me what else. I tell him I don't know. Are you okay?" Brian looked at her. They were in the kitchen. It was a Saturday morning. Emma was at a friend's house. Liam was watching cartoons in the living room, the sound of a children's show floating through the house like music. The ordinary machinery of their life was running, the dishwasher humming, the coffee maker gurgling, the dog scratching at the back door, and for a moment it was possible to believe that everything was fine, that they were just a normal family on a normal Saturday, and that nothing terrible had ever happened here. "No," Brian said. "I'm not okay. I don't know if I'm going to be okay. But I'm trying." That was the most honest thing he had said to her in months. Maybe years. Megan nodded. She didn't reach for him. She didn't apologize again. She had apologized enough, and words were cheap now, and they both knew it. She just nodded and said, "Okay. I understand." And then, because she needed him to know, "I'm trying too." Brian looked at her. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. And in that moment, Megan understood that this was the work. Not the grand gestures, not the dramatic reconciliations, not the moments of passion and clarity that movies were made of. The work was this: two people in a kitchen on a Saturday morning, being honest with each other, being brave enough to stay in the room when every instinct said to leave. It was not enough. It was not nearly enough. But it was something. Derek texted her once in April. It had been 2 months since she'd been to his apartment. 2 months since she'd worn the black dress. 2 months since she'd said I love you to a man who couldn't say it back. She had blocked his number and then unblocked it and then blocked it again and then left it unblocked, a test of her own willpower that she passed by the skin of her teeth every single day. His text was short, thinking about you. She read it and her heart jumped, literally jumped, a physical lurch that she felt in her chest like a fist, like her body was responding to a summons she had tried to ignore. And she sat at her desk at work and stared at the phone and thought about what it would cost to respond. The cost was everything. The cost was Brian and Emma and Liam and the Saturday morning kitchen and the fruit salad and the life she was trying, however clumsily, to rebuild. She did not respond. She put the phone down. She finished her report. She went home and made dinner, spaghetti, the kids' favorite, the one with the meat sauce that took all day and that she only made when she was trying to prove something, to herself if no one else. Brian came home from work and kissed her on the forehead, a small gesture, barely noticeable, and she felt it like a sunbeam, like warmth she had not earned and did not deserve but was receiving anyway. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, she sat on the porch. It was warm for April, the air soft and damp, the sound of neighborhood kids playing somewhere down the block, the smell of someone's barbecue drifting over the fence. Brian came out and sat beside her. They didn't speak. They watched the stars come out, one by one, the way they always did in spring, the way they had done every April since they'd moved into 12 April, 12 springs, 12 beginnings that had led them here, to this porch, to this moment, to this decision. I love you, Megan said. She said it to Brian. She meant it. She didn't know if it was enough. Brian might never trust her again, and she would have to live with that, would have to earn it back for as long as it took, which might be forever, which might be longer than she could sustain, but she said it because it was true, and because she had spent 5 months saying it to the wrong person, and because Brian deserved to hear it even if he couldn't yet believe it. Brian was quiet. Then he said, I love you too. He didn't say it like Derek would have, with calculation, with ambiguity, with the weight of what it could mean. He said it simply. The way you say something that is true and has always been true and will continue to be true regardless of what either of them does. He said it the way you say the sky is blue, the way you say water is wet, the way you say the sun comes up in the morning. Simple facts. Irrefutable things. They sat on the porch together until almost midnight. Then they went inside. They went to bed, to their bed, the one they had shared for 10 years, the one they had fought and made love and slept and cried on, and they lay in the dark and breathed. And Megan felt the full scope of her life, all of it, the good and the bad and the catastrophic and the salvageable, and she thought, I am not fixed. I am not healed. I am not even sure I know what those words mean anymore. But I am here. I am choosing to be here. It was not a happy ending. It was not the kind of resolution that came with swelling music and a credits roll. It was a Tuesday. It was a bed. It was two people who had hurt each other and didn't know how to undo it and decided, against all evidence and reason, to stay. Derek would always be the door she had walked through and couldn't close. Brian would always be the house she came back to. And Megan would always be the woman on the escalator, descending, not looking back, tears on her face, choosing, in the end, the harder thing. The better thing. The real thing. She didn't know if it would last. She didn't know if Brian would forgive her, or if the trust could be rebuilt, or if she would wake up one day and feel the pull of Derek's absence like a phantom limb and go running back. She didn't know anything, really. She was 35 years old and she had made the worst mistake of her life and she was still standing, and that would have to be enough. The window was open. The curtains moved in the breeze. Somewhere in the house, Emma was dreaming, and Liam was dreaming, and their dreams were sweet and uncomplicated and full of the kind of hope that Megan was only beginning to remember she had once had for herself. She closed her eyes. She stayed. Part 7. The morning after 3 months later. The house was alive with the particular chaos of a Saturday morning. Liam's cartoons playing at top volume, Emma arguing with Brian about screen time. Just one more episode, Dad, please. The dog barking at a squirrel in the backyard. The smell of bacon and the sound of the coffee maker gurgling like a small, devoted engine. Megan stood at the kitchen window and watched Brian flip pancakes. He was wearing the world's best dad apron that Liam had bought him for Father's Day 2 years ago, the one with the cartoon dinosaur on the front, and he was doing the pancakes with the same focused competence he brought to everything, his job, his parenting, his marriage, which he was slowly, painfully, deliberately rebuilding one Saturday morning at a time. "Can I have chocolate chips in mine?" Emma asked for the 3rd time. "No," Brian said. "Why not?" "Because I said so." "That's not a reason." "It's the only reason you're getting." Emma sighed the sigh of a 7-year-old who has just been reminded that the world does not revolve around her. Megan smiled. She walked to the counter and poured herself coffee and stood next to Brian, and for a moment their arms touched, accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, bodies learning to be close again after months of careful distance, and neither of them pulled away. "Hey," she said. "Hey. Need any help? You could make the fruit salad." "Okay." She made the fruit salad. She cut the strawberries and the blueberries and the grapes and arranged them in the blue ceramic bowl that had been her mother's, the one with the small chip on the rim that she had never fixed because it was perfect the way it was, imperfect and old and full of memories. She felt the ordinary weight of the morning, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the thing she had almost lost, and she knew it now in a way she hadn't before, not as an abstraction, not as the backdrop of her life, but as the actual precious substance of it. After breakfast, she took Liam to his soccer practice. Brian took Emma to her piano lesson. They had become a tag team, a partnership, navigating the wreckage of what she'd done and the slow, tender work of building something new from it. It wasn't easy. Some days it was brutally hard, days when Brian looked at her with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite forgiveness, days when she drove past Derek's building and felt the pull, days when she woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep and lay there cataloging all the ways she had failed. But days, more days, now, it was good. Quietly, stubbornly good. The way a plant grows after you've finally given it the right amount of water and light. Slow. Imperceptible. But real. She was sitting in the minivan outside the soccer field, watching Liam chase the ball with more enthusiasm than skill. He had not inherited his father's natural athleticism, which was fine, which was more than fine, because the point was not the ball. The point was trying. The point was being outside in the spring air with other kids and a coach who clapped and said good try, even when the ball went sideways, when her phone buzzed. A text from Brian, piano lesson ran long. Emma wants to stop for ice cream. Thoughts? She typed back, yes. Tell her I said it's okay. Love you. 3 words. Easy to type. Harder to mean, some days, the way anything is harder when you've learned how easily things can be lost, but she meant them. That was the thing she had finally learned. Love wasn't a feeling, it was a choice, and you had to keep choosing it every day, especially on the days when it was hard, especially on the days when you weren't sure you had anything left to give. She put the phone down. She watched Liam kick the ball, actually kick it, this time make contact, sent it sailing 5 feet in the wrong direction, and she laughed, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere genuine. And she felt the April sun on her face and the wind in her hair and the particular sweetness of a Saturday morning that had been given back to her. She thought about Derek sometimes. Not the way she used to, not with the obsessive, self-destructive compulsion that had consumed her for those 5 months, not with the ache that made her hands shake and her breath catch, but with a quieter acknowledgement. He had been real. What she'd felt for him had been real, not love. She understood now, not real love, but something that had felt like love, something that had worn love's clothes and spoken in love's voice and had eventually revealed itself to be something else entirely. She would always carry him with her, the way you carry a scar, not healed, not gone, but a part of you, a record of something that happened, a warning written on the body. But she had chosen. She was still choosing. Every day she chose Brian and Emma and Liam and the fruit salad on a Saturday morning and a life that was imperfect and challenging and entirely, irreducibly hers. The soccer practice ended. Liam ran to the car, sweaty and grinning. "Did you see me, Mom? I kicked it. I saw you, baby. I saw you." She drove home. Brian and Emma were already there. There was ice cream in the kitchen, 3 flavors, a compromise that only a family could love, and Emma was telling Liam about her piano piece in the exaggerated detail of a 7-year-old. Recounting a minor triumph, and then the teacher said it was the best she's heard in weeks. Liam, weeks. And Brian was leaning against the counter eating chocolate chip ice cream right out of the carton with a spoon, which was the thing he did that used to annoy her and now seemed like the most human, lovable thing she had ever seen. She took the carton from him. She ate a spoonful. She handed it back. "Thank you," she said. "For the ice cream?" "For all of it." Brian looked at her. His eyes were tired. He was still tired a lot, they both were, because rebuilding something was harder than building it in the first place, because you had to unlearn the old patterns before you could learn new ones. But there was something else there, too. Something that looked like hope, or its first cousin. Something that looked like the beginning of believing again. "Yeah," he said. "You too." That night, after the kids were in bed, Megan went to the basement. There was a box there, from the attic, that she had not opened in years. It contained things from her past, old photographs, letters, yearbooks, a dried rose from her prom bouquet that she had kept for reasons she no longer understood, the corsage from her first date with Derek, which she had kept for even less understandable reasons. She sat on the basement floor with the box open in front of her. She took out the corsage. It was brown and brittle, the ribbon faded to the color of old bone. She turned it over in her hands. She thought about the girl who had worn it, 18 years old, standing in Derek's kitchen at a pre-prom party, feeling like the luckiest person in the world. That girl had had no idea. That girl had thought love was something you earned, something you proved, something you had to fight for and claw for and hold on to with both hands, because if you let go, even for a second, it would disappear. She had thought that the harder you worked for love, the more real it was. She had thought that Derek's distance was a test and her job was to pass it. She understood now that she had been wrong. Love was not something you fought for. Love was not something you earned. Love was something you chose, calmly, deliberately, on a Saturday morning in April, when no one was watching, and there was no crisis, and no drama, and the person you loved was right there in the next room, eating ice cream and doing the dishes and being a person who was also trying, also failing, also choosing you back. She put the corsage back in the box. She closed the box. She carried it to the trash bin in the garage. She stood there for a moment, in the dark, with the box at her feet, 15 years of history, sitting in a garbage bin, ready to be taken away, and she felt something lift. Not all of it. Not the weight of what she'd done, which she would carry forever. But some of it. The weight of what she had been carrying before Derek ever came back. The weight of being a girl who thought she wasn't enough. That was the weight she was setting down tonight. She went back inside. Brian was on the couch. She sat next to him. He put his arm around her, the first time he had done that in months, the first time since before Brian had found the messages, and she leaned into him, and they watched a movie, an old one, something they used to watch before the kids, before everything got complicated. And it was the most ordinary night of their lives. It was perfect. Epilogue. 1 year later the reunion was Tyler's idea again. Same restaurant, same group of people, slightly older, slightly grayer, slightly more grateful for what they had. Megan or SVPDS without hesitation, without the 3-day stall, without the internal debate, without any of the drama she would have manufactured a year ago. She was going. It was a dinner. It was old friends. It was nothing to do with Derek. She wore a green dress. Ryan helped her with the zipper, kissed the back of her neck, and said, "Have a good time. Tell Tyler I said hi." It was almost exactly what he'd said the year before, the same words, the same kiss, the same warm solid presence of a man who loved her, and the difference between those two moments was the distance of an entire lifetime. A year ago, she had changed outfits 4 times and trembled applying mascara and thought about Derek Hollis with every fiber of her being. Now she wore the green dress because it was comfortable and she liked the color and she was going to see her friends. That was all. Derek was not at the reunion. He had moved, a new position, a new city, a new life. She had heard from Tyler, casually, in a phone conversation that Megan had mostly tuned out. Derek was fine. Derek was doing well. Derek was Derek, and she was she, and the escalator was a year behind her, and the corsage was in the trash, and she was here, at the Meridian, in a green dress, choosing her life. She sat at the same table. She ate the same salmon. She drank the same wine. She laughed at Tyler's jokes and hugged Michelle and shook David's hand, and at the end of the night, when people migrated to the bar, she stayed. Tired? Tyler asked. A little, Megan said. Long year? The longest of my life. Tyler nodded. He didn't ask for details. Tyler had always been like that. He could read a room, read a person, know when to push and when to let things be. He had known, she realized now, exactly what he was doing a year ago when he'd engineered the reunion, when he'd made sure Derek was there, when he'd engineered the walk to the subway. He had known what he was doing, and he had done it anyway, and she didn't know if she was angry at him or grateful or both. To next year, he said, raising his glass. To next year, Megan agreed. She clinked her glass against his. She looked around the restaurant, at the faces she had known for 20 years, at the life she had built and almost lost and somehow, impossibly, kept, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Not the passive kind, not the Sunday school version, but the real thing, sharp and specific and earned. Gratitude for Brian, who had stayed. For Emma, who was 9 now and reading chapter books with a flashlight past her bedtime. For Liam, who had made his first real goal in soccer, the ball sailing straight into the net while Megan screamed from the sideline. For Dr. Okafor, who had helped her understand that she was not broken beyond repair, that patterns could be changed, that people could choose differently. For the Tuesday morning when she had woken up and chosen the harder thing and it had been the right thing. for the life she had been given and the life she was building one day at a time out of the wreckage of the worst thing she had ever done. She went home at midnight. Brian was asleep, not pretending to be, not waiting up for her, trusting that she would come home because she always came home now, because home was where she chose to be. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched him sleep, the way he slept on his side, one arm extended toward her side of the bed, the way he had slept for 10 years, waiting for her, even when he didn't know he was waiting. She got into bed. She lay down beside him. She put her hand on his arm, and he stirred, and he said, without waking, "Hey." "Hey," she whispered. "Glad you're home." "Me too." She closed her eyes. She didn't think about Derek. She didn't think about the escalator or the midnight drives or the iPhone in a white box. She thought about tomorrow, about Emma's piano recital and Liam's soccer game and the grocery list and the phone call with her mother and the ordinary, extraordinary accumulation of a life that was still being lived, still being chosen, still being made new every single day. She thought, this is it. This is the thing. And for the first time in a very long time, it was enough.